You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 5th of November 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
We can respond to oligarchy and authoritarianism with the strength it fears, not the appeasement it craves.
New York's mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani has a huge task in front of him, not only tackling Donald Trump, but making New York housing more affordable. We'll be joined by Andrew Tuck to get his take on how and whether it can really be done. After that, we'll have a rundown of the papers with Vincent McAviney. What's caught your eye, Vinny?
Well, an alarming story about how Russia's been using influencers to recruit people into factories making drones, why cybersecurity is more important than ever after M&S took a massive profit cut, and we'll also be looking at how you build more houses by also building forests.
We'll get into all of those stories. We'll also have a roundup of news from the world of fashion with our very own Natalie Theodosi. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Happy bonfire night for those here in the UK. Although we're going to start today's show with a look at New York, the big mayoral win of the self-proclaimed democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani. And we also want to take a wider look at housing and affordability because it played such a big role in this campaign that led to his election. And I'm joined for all of this in the studio by Andrew Tuck, Monocle's editor-in-chief, host, voice of the urbanist, which of course makes you uniquely placed to unpack all of this for us, Andrew. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. That's a big billing. Let's see if I can live up to it.
As the host of The Urbanist, you're putting that urbanist hat on. Just give us your reactions, first of all.
Well, it's extraordinary. A huge election win. Not a surprise. I think obviously had counted on this in recent days. But it's obviously an interesting moment for the Democrats. Is this the start of a revival in their fortunes? But it's also, for me, being the host of The Urbanist, fascinating to see what his ambitions are for changing New York, a mercantile city where anything goes, we've felt. And now he's going to try and bring in all of these ways of trying to change the city with running food stores for the city with affordable food. And as you say, trying to take control of the rent situation and supply people with more affordable housing. The most complicated issue, I think, on every city leader's plate around the world.
It is for so many cities, and we'll get into that. But just about New York, as you mentioned that and how he's going to change it, I'm just struck by what a colorful bunch of mayors New York tends to get over the years, doesn't it? I mean, Ed Koch, Giuliani, Bloomberg, Eric Adams, now Mamdani. It's such an incredible group when you look at it that way, a past in New York's history.
What's amazing about New York, and I think that in the past we didn't have this so much in Europe, but when the likes of Boris Johnson was mayor of London, you began to sense this. New York has always been a place where the leader of the city is not just CEO, not just a person making sure that the books are balanced, but a champion of the city. And as you say, has often become a global political figure, somebody whose name is known around the world. Now,
presidential runs.
Yeah, presidential runs. And London's mayor is probably known around the world just because Donald Trump hates him so much. But apart from that, most European mayors, their names would not be so well known. If you asked an American to name even the mayor of Paris, for example, I think they would struggle to name them.
That is a fair point. There are some similarities with London and Boris Johnson obviously also getting to the top. But to stick with New York and particularly this affordability thing, because as you say, it is such a thorny thing. I've lived in New York for a little bit. I've tried to live in New York. It is such an expensive city. What do you expect Mamdani to do about it?
Well, he's had this rallying cry of freeze the rent, and he has said that he will use the controls that he has. So there is about 30% of housing in New York falls under rent controls that he has some influence on via a board, but that board has political appointees. It may be that's been already kind of stacked with people who will take a position against him. So we don't know exactly how much he can control it. And he has to do this in an interesting way, because the more that you control rents, the risk, say most economists, is that you then see on the other side the people who would be potential investors on doing the other part of it, which is building more housing, which is traditionally seen as a way of, bigging up supply to drop rents to make it more affordable, that begins to dry up. And we've seen that in past instances. When Ireland brought in its rent controls, it did work in controlling the rent for many people, but it had all these unintended consequences, one of which was that many developers either held onto land and said, look, we're just going to sit this out, we can't do it, or they chose to put off projects or mothball them. And the risk is that happens in New York as well. You will see a decline in the number of units being brought forward as you take control of people's rents. But there was an interesting piece the other day, which I was reading in The Atlantic, which was saying that maybe there's an interesting thing which they had looked at some data, which is when you do control rents, what happens in those neighbourhoods, people become less NIMBYist. Mostly people in housing that is not premium, the most expensive housing in the city, they are often against any change in their neighbourhoods because they think it will get gentrified and their rents pushed up. So what they had seen was actually maybe there's a chance here that in New York that if you did control the rents, that at least the people in the neighbourhoods would not be opposed to any new development. So there are so many levers and unintended consequences with rent control, but he's going to have a go.
To flip it around, I guess, as you mentioned, a case like Ireland, if Mamdani were to look at either studies or other places, are there places that you think have actually gotten this right? Are there examples that might translate to New York? I am thinking of one of my own home cities, Vienna, does this particularly well.
Well, Vienna has an extraordinary history of developing social housing that goes back, to the 20s and 30s. It has one of the largest populations in Europe living in essentially social housing, and the rents are amazing. They don't eat up people's entire salaries. They're controlled, and what's more is that so many people are on board with what social housing means and its value, that it's well maintained and looked after, and there's no kind of social kind of scrutiny or suggestion that you're not as good as anybody else because you're living in social housing. Similarly, in a place like Singapore, they have a very similar attitude to social housing. That, though, is built off the back of generations of building social housing, of commitment to it, and of getting buy-in in a city where there is a kind of a social democratic underbelly that helps support this.
A common historical culture.
Yeah, common historical culture. And that's hard to just airlift into a city like New York. So he will face challenges there. And even when you think, and it's not rent control, but here in London, just in the last few weeks, we've seen the mayor, Sadiq Khan, clearly somebody who is a political ally of Mamdani, say actually to developers here in the city, I know we have this level of 35% of any project needs to be affordable housing. I'm going to drop that now to 20% because that number is so tough, say developers, that they're doing the same thing. They're not developing because it's not just greed. We're in a time where the materials to build a house, the supply chain has been so inflated with cost that they say, look, there's no wriggle room here to make a profit. Where is my margin? So the risk is, again, for Mamdani, that you bring in rent controls, but where there are private landlords, they say, look, okay, if we can't put up the rent this year, I can't repair the roof this year. So then you begin to see a falling in the level of the quality of the housing stock. So then there's even more intervention from City Hall. So I think if that's he's got in on this promise, He should see what he can do and see how it works out. But there is no magic solution here. And the more you pull one lever, the more it sets off another set of unintended consequences.
Just a quick note on some of the other things, as you touched on them. Supermarkets. He wants to, for example, bring sort of government-subsidized supermarkets to parts of New York. He wants free buses in the city. What do you make of some of those plans? Free public transport? Good idea?
Again, if you have the funding for it, amazing. We've watched in places like Estonia where they've brought it in.
I love that. I remember going to Tallinn and being quite surprised that I could just travel everywhere for free.
I spend a lot of time in the city of Palma de Mallorca, and with my residency there, I have a free bus pass, so I get on every bus and go everywhere free, and it changes your behaviour. You know, why would I take the car? Why would I even think about that? I can go everywhere easily, and there's something, even though you're saving a modest amount, it's just like something quite pleasant about getting on the bus and tapping your card and away you go. So it changes people's behaviour in extraordinary ways. So I think for the affordability, for mobility, for getting around the city, it's an incredible thing if you can fund it. And again, let's see how that happens. I'm a little bit more sceptical on the affordable food stores. Again, he's got to go into the market and buy that food, and the prices that farmers are demanding are based on the costs that they're facing. The supply chain is actually often quite lean and mean, and people are not making the epic profits that you imagine on food. It's inflation that's the beast there, and he has no ability to control how inflation is pushing up the food prices. And again, I think there you do walk into a situation where we see here in the UK, many people are dependent on food banks for getting affordable food. I think those should be slightly different questions, where people have not enough resources to get food to feed themselves and their families. Then that there is a role definitely there for City Hall. But on the whole, I think that the supermarkets, they know how to supply food better.
Tremendous affordability challenges. Andrew, we'll have to get you back on at like the 6-month mark to see how Mamdani's doing. Andrew Tuck, Monocle's editor-in-chief, thanks very much for joining us. And now here's Laura Kramer with the other news headlines from what sounds like a very busy Zurich newsroom.
Thanks, Chris. Shares in big tech companies have dropped amid fears that artificial intelligence firms are overvalued. The fall followed news that investor Michael Burry, who was made famous by the film The Big Short, placed major bets against 2 big companies. Markets have reacted quickly to his move, sparking fresh concerns about the AI boom. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has unveiled his first federal budget, promising a major economic overhaul. The plan aims to counter U.S. tariffs and boost growth. Carney also pledged to lift defense spending to meet NATO's target of 2% of GDP. Iran has freed 2 French citizens after more than 3 years in detention. They were released from Tehran's notorious Evin prison. President Macron welcomed the news, saying they are now safe at the French embassy in Tehran. And an Australian writer's diary collection has won the Baillie Gifford Prize for Nonfiction. How to End a Story by Helen Garner captured her life and career from Melbourne's bohemian art scene to the collapse of her marriage in the 1990s. It's the first time a diary has taken the prize. Those are the day's headlines here in Zurich. Chris, back to you at Midori House.
Thanks very much, Laura, for managing to get through all of that from a very busy Zurich cafe. It's time now for a roundup here at Midori House of stories in the UK papers, and I'm joined for that right here in the studio by journalist, broadcaster, Monocle Radio regular politics commentator, Vincent McAviney. Happy bonfire night, first of all.
Happy bonfire night.
Are you doing anything? What do we
I'm
typically
trying to
do
keep
here?
our dog calm. This sort of week is like the juxtaposition. We've had Diwali, and then we had Halloween, and now bonfire. It's like 2 weeks of torture. So it involves cranking up classical music really loud to try and drown it out. But unfortunately in the UK, I don't know what it's like where listeners are listening, but you can just buy fireworks. You don't need a license, and people just set them off at all hours of the day at this time. So middle of the night, getting woken up by a petrified dog is not fun. So I've gone away. I don't like bonfire night anymore.
The dog doesn't get used to it after like the 3rd run?
No.
Never.
They hate
never.
it.
They hate it no matter what. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. We won't celebrate bonfire night then. We'll move on to some other stories. Tell us what you've found for us. As you mentioned at the outset, first of all, we want to talk about essentially tricking people into making Russian drones.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating long read that the BBC have put out. And it's a tactic that we knew Russia was using social media to recruit people, sometimes unwittingly, to carry out tasks. Like, for instance, here in the UK, there have been prosecutions of people who have been carrying out arson attacks on sort of facilities which were storing aid for Ukraine. But this is another level. This was using social media influencers in South Africa to recruit women, to trick them into traveling to Russia, where they thought they were going to get all kinds of training and do some jobs. They then arrive and are forced to work in factories making Iranian-designed drones, which are then used for the war in Ukraine. And it's incredibly perilous. This factory even came under attack from Ukrainian drone sort of response while she was there. And it sort of details how she was essentially, with many others, thinking hundreds, perhaps thousands, tricked into making this sort of journey to Russia to carry out this dangerous work, which resulted in them getting injuries as well from manufacturing the munition parts of these drones.
There are so many different aspects to this, aren't there? Kind of, this isn't even hybrid warfare, I guess, but so many, I guess, headlines around the war in Ukraine and Russia that we just don't even realize how deep this goes.
It does. I think it also belies the fact that Russia is struggling in its war efforts. I mean, we know that hundreds of thousands of young Russians have been killed in these battles, but also it sort of points to the fact that maybe they are struggling to sort of get workers in to work in their factories for munitions, for building these Shahed 136 drones. And it does sort of show that perhaps, maybe it's because Russians are unwilling to sort of take the jobs because it's a lack of support for the war, or they know how kind of dangerous these factories are, or it's a sort of silent way of saying that they protest against it. But if they're having to go through these lengths of, organizing these online campaigns to bring people all the way from South Africa, then there must be something going on behind the scenes.
Well, speaking of other attacks, let's look at here in the UK. There was a big cyber attack and M&S has had to take a massive profit hit because of it.
Yeah, Marks and Spencer's, which is a sort of retail stalwart here in the UK, its fortunes have ebbed and flowed over the decades. But for the past 10 years, it has really had a turnaround, both on its sort of food front and increasingly its fashion front as well. But the UK retailer came under a sustained cyber attack earlier this year with online orders for clothes, furniture, and food shut down for weeks because of this cyber incursion from a Russian group. They've said that they will take a £136 million hit on annual profits. And it's sort of a timely reminder that this kind of thing, changing passwords, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, good cybersecurity is critical for modern businesses because you don't have to break into a company headquarters to absolutely destroy the internal data centers of it. It's things like this. And we're seeing it now. It sadly played out much wider with Jaguar Land Rover. The bill for that hack, where, production on vehicles has been down for months, not only affecting Jaguar Land Rover, but tens of thousands of people in the supply chain across the UK manufacturing parts. That is expected to run the damage from that into the billions of pounds and is raising questions about business preparedness, but also the responsibility of government and intelligence agencies to step in and help private companies in these situations.
Well, Vinny, we want to move on to some slightly happier news. We were just talking about housing with Andrew Tuck at the top of the show in New York, and there's some news on this here in the UK. Forest towns between Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah, this is a project that the Labour government is starting. They have pledged to build hundreds of thousands of new homes before the next general election. And one area where they're keen to do this is the sort of, if you imagine a triangle, at the bottom you've got London, and then at the two sort of upper points you've got Oxford and Cambridge. This is what they're calling the sort of Silicon Valley Triangle here in the UK. And the corridor at the top between Oxford and Cambridge, they have reactivated a decades dormant rail line which is coming online very soon to be able to travel between the two without having to come in and out of London as well. And along this line, Labour is looking at building lots of houses, but the way they're kind of getting around a bit of the NIMBYism is that they come with a commitment to building a new forest around these houses so that there is green spaces for the people living in these new towns that will be along this railway line, and so that there is a sort of neutralizing effect on the building when it comes to carbon emissions. They're also looking at doing this in the north, and it's a way, Labour are saying that they aren't going to be sort of cowed by the NIMBYs. This housing has to be built, and it's a way of slightly softening the blow and the impact on the landscape.
Just finally, Vinny, before we let you go, you wanted to talk David Beckham. He's got a knighthood.
This is interesting because it is a masterful exercise in how to turn around a rebrand. David Beckham was damaged twice. He's been desperate for a knighthood. He got his OBE all the way back in the early 2000s. He's done a lot of charity work, to be fair to him, over the years, and he is the modern model for most celebrities and how they manage their brand and do charity work and do things. But he has been locked out of getting a knighthood for a long time. First, because of a tax program he took advantage of, and then a leak of an email in the mid-2010s in which he slagged off in very vivid terms the committee that decides who get these knighthoods.
That is really not the way to get yourself a knighthood.
And attacked others who received them that he thought were less worthy. But he got his gong yesterday at Windsor Castle. But it has taken a sort of really strategic lobbying campaign.
And like a change in the committee members? Or is it the same ones?
Probably that as well, yeah, after you've called them what he did. But also he's sort of played into print. He's got really into environmental causes. He's got massively into gardening. He's on the cover of Country Life magazine this month. He's got really into preserving bees, and he's making his own honey. Talk about appealing to the man really in charge, who is King Charles, in terms of getting this. It has been quite a fascinating exercise. And that big documentary, the Netflix one, Victoria Beckham's recent one, was pretty dull, didn't really do much for her. But the Beckham one, even if you hate football, it's a really fascinating insight into what a sportsman does in the modern world and how he really piloted that modern career path. But yes, he's getting this for sports and charity work, but also after what has to be one of the best run PR and strategic campaigns of modern times in a rebrand.
The great rebrand. Vincent McAviney, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and joining me next here in the studio for a roundup of news from the world of fashion is Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi. Good afternoon, Natalie.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Any thoughts on Victoria Beckham, as Vinny was just mentioning?
I have to say, I'm sorry, Vinny, but I strongly disagree. I enjoyed the Victoria Beckham documentary as much as I did David Beckham's one.
As much as David Beckham's one. So you also liked David Beckham's one. You liked
I did. I mean, I'm new to the world of football, so there was a lot more information to take in. But I think going back and looking at the life and career of a really great woman who achieved a lot is interesting, and it was funny and charming, and you get to see them behind the scenes of her business and everything that the press put her through. So I thought it was quite interesting.
All right, well, I'll let you and Vinny fight that out outside of the studio.
Yeah, we will after the show.
Later. You can have a whole discussion about that. I wanted to go to some in-house news first of all, just because Monocle's November issue is out, and it's a big autumn fashion portfolio. What struck you in that? What were you trying to do with it as well? Outside
the autumn fashion, one of our biggest stories in the issue in the fashion section is quite a special one for me. It pays homage to Giorgio Armani, and
of course,
I had to write the story. We shot it and wrote it just a few days before the magazine was going to press, which always makes things really exciting. I got to go to the final show to see the final collection that he designed in the Pinacoteca di Brera, and then there was a whole exhibition in the museum that you got to see after hours when the museum was closed. It was a really emotional, historical moment, so we captured it. Got to write about the experience, speak to the people who were there, and pay homage to one of the industry's most influential designers, both when it comes
comes to design, but also the way that he built his business. So I think that's a really special story and a nice kind of memento, I think. And then, you'll find a lot of pages of autumn fashion, an interview with the CEO of Bulgari, and also the new creative director of Gousons, which is a Chanel-owned jewelry brand. So it's quite a mix, I would say.
There is quite a mix, and I do understand as well. On the cover, we have a guy with his collar up in a coat, and there's a specific column even about that, the fashion of collars.
I can't take any credit for that shoot or that cover. That's all our creative director, Rich. But yeah, there's a lot of conversation about the raised collars, that how it is now the way to wear your jacket, and it's on the cover of Monocle. So that's the story.
That is the story. Okay, well, let's move on to some others, although I would absolutely highlight the Armani story that you did as well in the magazine. I'm sure that was quite emotional.
It was really special.
But you did bring some other stories for us as well. We want to go into the world of fast fashion in a way. It's not going down very well in Paris, and who can blame them?
Exactly. I mean, they took over a historic site in the center of Paris, where the BHV was. And as far as I hear from our Paris editor as well, there's huge protest outside against Shein and I think the fast fashion giants in general. And it's interesting because even at the height of fast fashion, before the conversation started about how harmful these businesses are to both the environment and the workers making the clothes, the French and especially the Parisians were not very into the high street and into fast fashion. It was I always thought the Zaras in Paris were always quite empty compared to other cities, even at the height of these companies. And they just have a very different approach to fashion. And I think Paris is where you get the best vintage stores and markets, and there's a lot of mending shops. It's a different attitude. And that's why a huge opening of a store like Shein, which is faster than fast fashion, is not good news for the locals.
It is so interesting when something like this happens. I mean, I know this is a different comparison, but I'm reminded of like Starbucks moving into Vienna, the capital of coffee culture. Sometimes it works and it sticks, other times it doesn't. I mean, did Shein just misread the mood in a place like Paris?
I think so. And of course, I mean, they've been expanding really fast all across Europe and the US. So it's just another store, another door, but without maybe thinking about the implications of especially opening such a big space in such a central location. It's quite a bold statement at a time when there's a lot of criticism about how that business operates, how wasteful and those collections are. So I will see how it works out. There's still, I'm sure, some consumers who want that quick, cheap product. I don't think they will just shut doors overnight, but I think it's good to be having these conversations and for them to be challenged.
Well, one other thing we wanted to talk about, if autumn fashion was the topic of Monocle's November magazine, there's also winter things going on, of course, as we head into that. I understand there's the Dior Alps capsule for winter 2025.
Exactly. And I think this is something that has been going on for a while. All the big brands are investing a lot in ski wear capsules, in pop-up shops, in all the great ski resorts. It's a huge revenue driver.
It's a huge market.
Exactly. It's a big market, and they want to catch their customer at every point. And the same happens in the summer. They go to Mykonos and to Ibiza and to Saint-Tropez with really incredible pop-up stores and dedicated collections and activations. So it's now part of the marketing calendar. But what's interesting now is that Dior is writing a new chapter with a new creative director, Jonathan Anderson, but you can still see that the Dior Alps collection has the previous creative director's handwriting. So it's also interesting to see how it's going to take time for them to really align their messaging and for everything to reflect Anderson's kind of aesthetic.
Still in transition. Well, just finally, we did want to also make one mention of Chanel and its Singapore cruise show. What can you tell us about that?
Another house in transition,
exactly.
which had such incredible feedback when its new designer, Mathieu Blasi, showed its collection. But yeah, they are also constantly on the move. They have shown a collection in Paris, but Cruise, which was designed previously by the studio team, is now in Singapore because just taking care of those VIP customers is their utmost priority, and they travel to them, they go and meet them. Asia is a huge market, so those events are really important, and there will be another Métiers d'Art show in New York before the year end. So they are busy and they are constantly putting on shows for both the fashion industry, but also for their customers.
Also just interesting formats again, from alpine pop-up stores to cruises.
Exactly. The seasons have completely changed, so you can get whatever you want any time of the year, I think.
Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director, thank you very much for joining us. That is all the time we have on this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Vincent McAviney and Laura Kramer. Our researcher was Joanna Moser, and our studio manager was Christy O'Grady. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Termack. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.